In 1847, the bells of St. Anne's Convent stopped ringing. For 3 days, the small town of Vermilion Parish heard only the wind moving through the sugarcane, and the faint cry of an infant where no child should exist. The nuns said the Lord had tested them. The priest said nothing at all. By the 4th day, St. Anne's was boarded shut, its chapel sealed by order of the diocese. No record survived, only whispers that one sister, old and barren, had conceived without sin or permission. The convent had always been strange, a private order unaffiliated with Rome, built deep in the bayou on land said to sink a little deeper each year. The Sisters of St. Anne believed that purity was not born from denial, but from endurance, that the flesh could be sanctified through suffering. Their leader, Mother Adelaise, had ruled for 30 years. At 51, her face was pale as candle wax, her voice a steady hymn of restraint. But in the late summer of 1847, her prayers began to change. Witnesses, those few who later spoke, recalled her chanting alone in the chapel long after midnight, her words no longer Latin, but something older, rhythmic, almost serpentine. A young novice, Sister Thérèse, claimed she saw light moving beneath the chapel floorboards like a pulse. When Adelaise announced her divine visitation, no one dared question it. She claimed an angel had entered her womb in a vision, that God had chosen her to bear a holy sign before the year's end. The bishop dismissed it as delusion, yet within weeks her body began to change. By Advent, the Mother Superior was unmistakably pregnant. By Lent, the bayou whispered that she had been seen walking barefoot through the swamp at night, followed by someone the lanterns could not touch. When the diocesan envoy arrived that winter, St. Anne's greeted him with silence. The convent smelled of oil, herbs, and something faintly metallic, like blood washed too many times from stone. The sisters moved like pale ghosts through the halls, their eyes avoiding the envoy's gaze. In the refectory, a single loaf of bread sat untouched. The envoy, Father Mercier, asked to see Mother Adelaise. The convent's gatekeeper hesitated before leading him down a narrow staircase into the root cellar beneath the chapel. The air there was thick, humid, alive with the hum of unseen insects. A candle flickered against the low ceiling, revealing the Mother Superior kneeling in a circle of salt and chalk, her swollen belly draped in her habit. "Father," she whispered, "he is near." Mercier stepped back. The air grew colder. On the far wall, carved into the stone, was a symbol, not of any Christian liturgy, but older, angular, resembling the Veve signs once traced by the enslaved workers along the river plantations. Adelaise spoke again. The angel came as light, but he wore the voice of a man. He called himself Eliam. That night, the envoy locked himself in his quarters. The sisters said they heard him praying until dawn. When they entered in the morning, he was gone, his cassock neatly folded on the bed, a single wet footprint leading out the door. 2 days later, a whisper spread among the novices. A young man, a slave from the plantation across the marsh, had been found hiding near the convent wall. His name was Josias. He had no recollection of why he was there, only that he had followed a voice of light calling him to St. Anne's. That evening, Adelaise ordered that Josias be fed and kept in the cellar until the angel returns. From then on, the candles in her room never went out, and the walls began to bleed with mildew that shaped itself into wings. By mid-February, the convent had ceased receiving visitors. The gates rusted shut, and the bell tower's cross leaned a few inches closer to the swamp with every storm. Within those walls, the women lived by candlelight, their days consumed by fasting, prayer, and fear. Sister Thérèse, the youngest novice, was the first to see the light again. It came not from the sky but from beneath the chapel floor, a slow rising glow that pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat. She said it whispered Josias's name. When she told the others, they scolded her for blasphemy. But that night the glow returned, brighter, until it seeped through the cracks between the stones and danced across the altar like liquid fire. Mother Adelaide stood before it, her hands trembling yet open. "He has chosen his vessel," she murmured, "and his blood will cleanse us." Josias, meanwhile, grew frail in the cellar. He prayed constantly, though he could not remember the words he spoke. The nuns who brought him food claimed his eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Some said the air around him shimmered, distorting like heat on stone. When asked what he saw, Josias whispered, "The angel is made of voices. They speak in my sleep. They say she carries not a child, but a covenant." The following morning, Sister Beatrice was found dead in the garden well. No wound, no sign of struggle, only her hands clasped, as if in prayer, and a faint mark burned into her chest. The same angular symbol carved in the cellar stone. Adelaide announced that Beatrice had been taken into grace. But Thérèse noticed something else. The mother's voice had deepened. Her Latin chants warped into rhythms that no longer belonged to Scripture. That night, every candle in St. Anne's went out at once, and from the dark came a whisper, "Do not fear me. I am the beginning." The convent's journals. What little of them survived the flood. Years later, he spoke of a night they called the procession of the Black Veil. It began with the tolling of a bell no one had rung. The sound came from beneath the chapel, low and hollow, like something striking bone. At midnight, Mother Adelaide gathered all 21 sisters before the altar. She wore her mourning veil, heavy with bayou damp, and beneath it her eyes glimmered feverishly. "He comes for us," she said. "We must walk in darkness before we are reborn in light." The sisters obeyed. Each extinguished her candle and began to move through the corridors in silence, their bare feet whispering against the stone. They carried bowls of ash and oil, tracing the old symbols on the walls, marks the slaves on nearby plantations used during night feasts, symbols of crossing between worlds. The youngest novices wept as they worked. Sister Thérèse later recalled a moment when the procession reached the cellar door. A voice rose from below, Josias praying in tongues, his words lilting and strange, echoing with more than one tone. "The angel is awake," he said. "He walks between our breaths." Then came the light again, bursting from the cracks in the floor. The sisters fell to their knees as Adelaide lifted her veil. "Look upon his mercy," she cried, "and be cleansed of your fear." The air swelled with heat. The salt circles on the cellar floor began to boil. Thérèse saw faces forming in the light, not angelic but human, distorted, mouths open as if gasping for air. They hovered for a moment before sinking back into the stone. When dawn came, 4 nuns were missing. Their veils were found floating in the marsh, soaked but intact, each marked with the same burn pattern as Sister Beatrice's chest. And yet, Adelaide smiled through it all, her belly heavier, her voice serene. "Every birth requires a sacrifice," she said, "even for God." The Bishop of Baton Rouge could no longer ignore the rumors. By spring of 1848, whispers of miracles and disappearances at St. Anne's had reached the capital. Reports of unnatural lights, dead cattle near the marsh, and women chanting in the fields after midnight forced his hand. He dispatched a young priest named Father Léon Giraud, a scholar of theology and folklore, to observe the sisters discreetly and restore order. Giraud's carriage reached the convent after dusk. The swamp mist curled around the wheels like living breath. When the gates creaked open, he found the sisters waiting, 21 no longer, but 17, gaunt and silent. Their habits were stained with what looked like mud but smelled of iron. Mother Adelaide greeted him in the courtyard, her face radiant, her belly massive beneath her robes. "We are blessed, Father," she said. "He is almost among us." Giraud kept a journal during his stay, later recovered in fragments from the diocesan archives. In it, he wrote, "Their prayers are wrong, inverted, rhythmic, pulsing like heartbeats. The air trembles when they sing. I have seen the mother in the chapel at dawn speaking to the shadows on the wall. The shadows answer. He questioned the remaining sisters, but their words dissolved into riddles. "The light forgives all flesh," said one. "The angel eats what we no longer need," whispered another. When Giraud asked to see Josias, Adelais refused. "He is not a man anymore," she said softly. "He is the bridge." That night Giraud heard chanting beneath the floorboards. The voices were layered, male and female, human and not. He followed them to the cellar and found the stone door sealed with fresh wax. On its surface, drawn in blood, was the same sigil from his nightmares, an angular cross that turned in on itself. He pressed his ear to the stone. Something moved behind it, breathing slowly, rhythmically, like the tide. Then a voice whispered from inches away, "Father, you should not have come." The following Sunday, the sisters gathered for what Mother Adelais called the Psalm of Arrival. Father Giraud was ordered to attend, though his instincts screamed otherwise. He wrote that the chapel smelled of myrrh and decay, as though incense had been burned over something long dead. Adelais stood before the altar, her body trembling, her face gleaming with sweat. Her eyes, once gray, had turned a deep amber like sap catching fire. "He is ready to emerge," she declared. "He has waited through centuries of silence, and now the gate of flesh shall open again." Behind her, Josias was brought up from the cellar, shackled, his skin glistening with a strange phosphorescent sheen. His mouth moved in silent prayer, but no sound came. The sisters formed a circle around them, chanting words that Father Giraud could not recognize, syllables that throbbed like drumbeats, carrying the cadence of the bayou's old slave songs twisted into something darker. The mother began to sing. It was not melody but vibration, a tone that rattled the pews and made the candle flames elongate toward the ceiling. The walls began to sweat. The air rippled. Giraud described seeing veins in the stone, pulsing faintly with light. When Adelais placed her hands upon Josias's head, he screamed, a sound not of pain but of splitting, as if two voices were tearing apart from one throat. The chapel lights flared, revealing a symbol burned into the altar itself, spreading like roots. Then silence. Adelais collapsed, gasping. The sisters fell into convulsions, whispering fragments of psalms backward. When Giraud rushed to her side, he saw her stomach deflating, soft, hollow, and there on the floor between them was movement. Something small, pale, and slick. He wrote only one line after that before the ink broke into scrawls. It opened its eyes before it breathed. By dawn, the infant was gone. The sisters called it a miracle. Giraud called it an abomination. 3 days after the ritual, a thick fog settled over St. Anne's and did not lift for a week. The sun dimmed to an ember. No birds sang. The sisters said it was the veil between worlds thickening, the breath of the angel. Father Giraud remained inside the convent, unable to leave. The gates refused to open. The horses had vanished from their stalls. He wrote that the corridors now seemed longer, the doors repeating as though the building itself were rearranging to keep him trapped. He searched for the infant, if it could be called that. Adelais kept it hidden in her quarters, attended by 2 silent sisters who never left her side. When Giraud forced his way in one afternoon, the air felt wrong, heavy and warm, as if the room were alive. On the bed lay a bundle of cloth, unmoving. Adelais stood beside it, her face thin, eyes hollow yet fervent. "He does not cry," she said softly. "He does not hunger. He only listens." Giraud stepped closer. Beneath the linens he saw the faint rise and fall of breath. The skin was pale, almost translucent, veins dark and shifting like ink beneath parchment. Its eyes were open, not infant eyes, but ancient ones, black and reflective. When it blinked, the candles dimmed. He fell to his knees, crossing himself. "That is no angel," he whispered. Adelais smiled faintly. "No, Father. It is the memory of what came before angels." That night, he dreamed of the bayou, of the moon split in two and a voice rising from the water. "Feed me your prayers, and I will make them flesh." When he awoke, the chapel bells were ringing again for the first time in months. Every sister was kneeling in the courtyard, eyes upturned to the sky, their mouths open, singing without sound. And from Mother Adelaise's window a faint, rhythmic glow pulsed, like a heart beating against glass. Father Giraud's journal described the chapel at dawn as a cathedral of dread. The crucifix above the altar, once polished oak, had darkened to near black. From the nail wounds a crimson fluid seeped steadily, pooling on the altar boards. It was warm to the touch, sticky, metallic, unmistakably human. The sisters gathered silently around it, whispering blessings as if the blood were holy. Adelaide stood at the center, her hands raised, and muttered, "He is speaking now. He is among us." Giraud fell to his knees, trembling. "This is not God," he pleaded, "but something else. Something that wears the flesh of men and angels alike." But no one listened. They no longer feared him. Their devotion had shifted from the Father above to the unseen presence pulsing through the walls. Each sister now bore a mark on her chest, faint burns shaped like the sigil in the cellar. They said it was a gift, proof that the covenant had chosen them. Even Josias, the boy-turned-brother of the angel, had changed. His voice, once timid and human, now rang with overtones, some notes low and guttural, others high and unearthly. When he spoke, it felt as though the air itself vibrated, compressing the chest of anyone who listened too long. Giraud attempted to remove the crucifix, but it would not budge. The wood seemed fused to the stone behind it, veins of dark blood flowing into the wall. He tried to speak, to call for the authorities, but each time he opened his mouth, the voice of the infant, the angel, whispered back, "Not yet, Father. Not yet." By nightfall, Giraud began seeing shadows moving independently of the sisters, stretching along the walls like fingers, retreating when he looked directly. The bayou mist pressed against the chapel windows, thick and suffocating. Through the veil of fog, faint cries echoed, half human, half insect, that seemed to answer the rhythm of Josias's new, unnatural breathing. The convent had become a cage, a living organism, feeding on faith and flesh alike. And in its center, Mother Adelaide cradled the infant without a cry, smiling, her face aglow with a light that was not her own. By mid-spring, St. Anne's was unrecognizable. The once quiet convent had become a cathedral of whispers and light that pulsed like a living heart. Father Giraud wrote in his journal that he could no longer distinguish night from day. The windows glowed with unnatural luminescence, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe. The sisters, once fragile in body and spirit, now moved with predatory grace. Their voices had merged into a choir of shadows, singing in unison yet producing tones that no human throat could reach. The air vibrated with their harmonics, bending the light and warping the stone floors. Giraud described it as music that presses against your skull, forcing memory and sin to surface unbidden. Mother Adelaide sat at the center of the chapel, the infant in her arms. Its eyes, wide and black, reflected the glowing faces of the sisters like a mirror of the void. Each time it blinked, the candle flames flickered violently, casting grotesque forms on the walls. Josias knelt beside the altar, chanting incomprehensible words that seemed to summon movement from the shadows themselves. The shadows obeyed him. They twisted along the pews, curling around the sisters' legs, drawing them closer to the infant's light. Giraud noted, horrified, that the women's expressions had softened into ecstasy, or madness. He attempted to flee, but the doors refused. The locks were intact, but invisible forces pressed against them as if the building itself had willed them closed. In the hallway, the shadows reached toward him, brushing his skin like cold water. He fell to the ground, clutching the crucifix, praying aloud for mercy. The infant's gaze found him, and the room trembled with a pulse that was not entirely heartbeat. When he looked again, the sisters were kneeling in the floorboards, not human anymore, but extensions of the shadows themselves, their mouths moving in silent, violent synchrony. Giraud realized the truth. The convent was no longer merely a place of worship. It was a womb, a conduit, and St. Anne's had become the body of the angel, feeding, growing, and waiting to step into the world. The infant opened its mouth, and the shadows surged. Father Giraud's last journal entry began as an ordinary observation, but by nightfall it unraveled into fevered scrawl. The infant watches. It knows my thoughts. The walls breathe with its pulse. I cannot move, and yet I am moving. The sisters, they are shadows, and the shadows obey it. I have tried to speak, but my tongue is heavy with lead. That evening he ventured into the chapel for one final attempt to confront Adelais. The air was thick, damp, scented with iron and decay. The candles bowed in their holders, flames stretching toward the infant as though drawn by invisible hands. "Mother Adelais," he called, voice trembling. This is blasphemy. The Lord will not—" His words were cut short. The infant turned its head slowly, unnaturally, eyes like voids, and the room's temperature dropped sharply. The shadows recoiled, then surged forward in a living tide, encircling Giraud. He tried to flee, but every door led back to the altar. He fell to his knees, clutching his crucifix. A whisper, layered and infinite, filled the chapel. "You are part of the covenant now. You cannot leave." The sisters knelt in a circle around him, their mouths moving silently, forming words Giraud could feel more than hear. The shadows lifted from the floorboards, coiling around his arms, legs, and chest, pressing him into the stone tiles. The infant's eyes met his, and he saw lifetimes compressed into those black mirrors. Despair, devotion, and the inexorable pull of the bayou itself. His screams were muffled by the shadows, absorbed, and the last thing he saw was Adelais smiling down at him, her swollen belly gleaming, radiant with unholy light. By dawn, Giraud had vanished. The convent gates remained closed, the bell tower silent. Only the infant stirred in Adelais' arms, cooing softly, a sound that chilled the air like winter fog. The townspeople of Vermilion Parish later claimed that those who ventured near St. Anne's saw shapes moving behind the windows, pale figures, eyes glinting, chanting in a language no one alive could understand. But no one ever entered the convent again. St. Anne's was forgotten save for whispers carried on the wind, and the legend of a nun whose divine blessing brought a darkness that could never be exorcised. By late spring, the bayou around St. Anne's had grown thick with mist, so dense that the sunlight barely touched the swampy ground. Crops rotted in the fields, and the air was heavy with the metallic scent of decay. The townspeople whispered that the convent had become a place of unnatural hunger, that something fed there, and it was not merely flesh. Inside, the sisters had transformed. Their chants were constant, a low rhythmic drone that penetrated walls and windows, rattling doors and nerves alike. Mother Adelais held the infant high during each ritual, her voice rising above the choir of shadows. The child no longer cried or laughed. It observed, its gaze turning every heart in the room inward, exposing secrets, sins, and hidden desires. Josias moved silently among the sisters, guiding them in actions that seemed innocent at first. The sprinkling of ash, the drawing of symbols in blood and oil, the folding of linen over empty bowls. But Giraud's journal, discovered months later washed and charred in part, described it differently. The infant commands them. Each gesture they perform is directed by it, their obedience absolute. They consume not just bread or wine, but memory, hope, and fear. Even the shadows lean in to watch. This is no blessing, but a harvest. On the third night of what they called the Feast of Shadows, the infant's gaze swept the chapel. One of the older sisters trembled, her face pale and her eyes rolling back. She began to speak in a voice not her own, recounting sins of the town, stolen coins, secret murders, hidden infidelities. The others nodded in silent reverence. By dawn, the town's livestock had perished, and several citizens reported nightmares so vivid that they woke screaming, covered in sweat and mud. Some swore they glimpsed the infant's eyes through the fog outside the convent, glowing black, watching, judging. Mother Adelaide smiled, cradling the child. "He grows," she whispered. "And soon, all who wander too close will understand the meaning of our covenant." The convent was no longer merely a house of faith. It had become a beacon of something older, hungrier, and far beyond human comprehension. By early summer, the swamp around St. Anne's had begun to shift unnaturally. Trees twisted at impossible angles, their limbs like claws reaching toward the convent. The waters of the bayou thickened to a black sheen, reflecting not the sky but shadows that moved against the current. Fishermen who ventured too close vanished without trace, leaving only water rippling where no wind blew. Inside the convent, the sisters moved in perfect synchronization, their chants echoing like a heartbeat through the marsh. The infant, now larger than before, radiated a light that bent the darkness, casting flickering, monstrous shapes along the walls. Every time it opened its eyes, the swamp seemed to shiver in response. Josias, now pale and silent, followed the infant wherever it went. He no longer spoke, but seemed to act as conduit between the child and the sisters. The rituals had grown bolder. Candles were replaced with bowls of swamp water mixed with ash. The women traced symbols in the mud that ran like veins across the chapel floor, connecting them to the earth outside. Father Gerard, or what remained of his presence in the convent, watched helplessly from the shadows. He wrote that the swamp itself seemed alive, responding to the infant's will. Frogs croaked in unnatural harmonics. Eels writhed together in the water like serpents forming words. Even the wind carried whispers of the infant's name. He. By night, the bayou became a mirror of St. Anne's interior. Shadows moved in the fog like dancers, repeating the sisters' chants. Fish leapt from the water only to vanish midair, a faint glow trailing where they once were. Trees bent closer to the waterline as if leaning to hear the child's voice. Mother Adelaide, her body now twisted with unnatural vitality, cradled the infant as she walked barefoot along the banks. The water swirled around her feet, reflecting shapes of humans she had never seen, or perhaps humans who had been consumed. She whispered to the bayou, "You belong to him, and he to us." The swamp had awakened. It no longer belonged to men or women. It belonged to the infant, and through it to something far older, hungrier, and utterly divine in its malevolence. By midsummer, the town of Vermilion Parish teetered on the edge of nightmare. People who lived closest to the bayou reported waking to empty streets, doors swung open, livestock missing, and the unmistakable hum of chanting carried on the fog. Those who ventured to the water's edge swore they saw the faint glow of eyes beneath the mist, black, unblinking, watching. The infant's influence had begun to extend beyond the convent. Families vanished in the night, leaving behind only whispered rumors and traces of unnatural phenomena. Bowls of their last meal left perfectly arranged on the floor, handprints burned into walls, and shadows that lingered long after the sun rose. Parents found their children wandering toward the marsh, eyes glazed, chanting in the same alien rhythm as the sisters. Father Gerard, if he still existed in any recognizably human form, recorded a single observation. The living walk in the light of the child, but they are no longer theirs. Every heartbeat answers to him. Every thought bends to the covenant. They vanish not by death, but by will, consumed into the shadows of St. Anne's. Josias moved silently through the town, unseen yet sensed. People described seeing him in peripheral vision, small and pale, leading others into the fog. They obeyed him instinctively as though drawn by invisible chains. Mother Adelaide, radiant and unaging, appeared on porches and in windows, offering cryptic blessings to those she deemed worthy. Those who refused and or even questioned never returned. The infant cooed in response, its voice vibrating the air in low primal harmonics that unsettled animals and humans alike. By the end of July, the town had emptied. Only the convent remained, standing in the mist like a black monolith. Outside, the bayou shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the pulsating glow of the infant's presence. The covenant had claimed Vermilion Parish, and the boundaries between the human and the unholy were forever blurred. The first wave of horror was complete. Yet the infant's hunger had only begun. By the end of July, the Sisters of St. Anne's had abandoned all pretense of human life. Their chants had become a constant undercurrent in the bayou, echoing through the fog like a living river of sound. Mother Adelaide prepared the midnight baptism, a ritual she claimed would bind the infant fully to the earth, the convent, and the shadows that pulsed through the swamp. The ceremony began in the chapel at midnight. The sisters stripped the altar bare, replacing candles with bowls of blackened water from the bayou. Adelaide held the infant high, its eyes now impossibly large, reflecting the flickering forms of the sisters like mirrors of darkness. Josias knelt before them, his voice silent yet resonant, guiding the sisters in movements that twisted their bodies into impossible positions. The chanting reached a fever pitch. Each syllable cracked the walls and the stone floors began to sweat a viscous copper-colored fluid. The shadows rose, detached from the walls and ceiling, stretching their forms toward the infant. It cooed, a sound that made the air vibrate, forcing the sisters into ecstatic convulsions. Adelaide dipped the infant into the black water, whispering words older than the bayou itself. As the child emerged, the shadows writhed violently, connecting with every surface, the beams, the floorboards, even the mist outside. The convent seemed alive, breathing, pulsing with the infant's rhythm. The air itself carried a low hum, vibrating through bone and thought. Father Giraud's journal, the last fragment recovered months later, described the aftermath. The sisters are no longer women. They are extensions of the infant. The swamp itself flows through them. The child's gaze now stretches beyond walls, beyond trees, beyond men's comprehension. They have become the covenant. I do not know if I remain myself. By dawn, St. Anne's had ceased to resemble a convent. The marsh around it twisted unnaturally, rising slightly as if the earth itself bowed in deference. Every living thing nearby, fish, frogs, even birds, moved to the rhythm of the infant's pulse. The midnight baptism was complete. The covenant had bound the sisters, the infant, and the bayou together in a harmony of unnatural obedience, a darkness that was no longer contained, but alive, aware, and patient. By August, the waters of the bayou had become mirrors to something impossible. Those who dared approach saw not themselves but fragments of the convent, shadows of women kneeling endlessly, faces pale and aglow in unnatural light. Some claimed the reflection whispered their sins back to them, speaking in tones that belonged neither to human nor angel, yet were undeniably alive. The infant's presence had grown so powerful that reality itself seemed to bend near St. Anne's. Trees twisted to meet the reflections of unseen forms in the water. Fish moved in patterns too deliberate to be natural, forming sigils when viewed from above. The mist carried the faint sounds of chanting, echoing even where no convent existed. Mother Adelaide walked the banks each night, the infant cradled to her chest. Villagers reported seeing her figure in the water long after she had disappeared into the fog, her image perfectly mirrored, yet subtly wrong. Limbs too long, head tilted at impossible angles. The infant's eyes reflected these distortions, watching the world as if it were a toy, a canvas, a prey to be studied. Father Giraud, whose journal survived only in fragments, described a night when he tried to flee through the swamp. I saw my reflection in the water and it moved before I did. My eyes were black, my mouth open in a scream I had not yet uttered. The water, it called me. I tried to turn away, but the shadows followed and the singing grew louder. I do not know if I am still me, or just another reflection of the covenant. Even the sisters, now extensions of the infant, seemed tethered to the reflections. They would stare into the water for hours, murmuring praises, their eyes glazed, their bodies swaying in rhythm with the pulsing light that emanated from the child. By now, St. Anne's was no longer a place of faith nor even fully of this world. The bayou had become a lens into a deeper darkness, a conduit through which the infant, and the covenant it represented and observed, judged and claimed all who approached. The reflection was no longer simply a mirror, it was a gateway. By late August, the bayou surrounding St. Anne's had become a place of hunger, not for food, but for memory. Those who strayed too close awoke to find their recollections dissolving, names of loved ones forgotten, faces of childhood friends erased, entire days evaporating from thought. The infant's influence was no longer confined to the convent. It reached outward, consuming identities and leaving only husks of people wandering in the mist. The sisters, fully integrated into the covenant, guided these victims with gentle hands and vacant eyes. They led them to the swamp's edge, chanting the Feast of the Forgotten, an ancient hymn twisted by the infant's will. As the humans knelt, the black water lapped at their feet, drawing their memories away. Names, deeds, dreams, everything that made them themselves, flowed into the infant's gaze, feeding its growing consciousness. Josias acted as intermediary, moving silently, his pale face unreadable. He touched the heads of the doomed, and their eyes glazed instantly, mouths murmuring words not their own. Father Giraud's journal, half-burned and waterlogged records, his horror at witnessing townspeople he had once known now, swaying in obedience to an entity that had neither mercy nor understanding. Mother Adelais, her body unnaturally youthful, cradled the infant during the ritual. "They are ours," she whispered. "All that comes near will be reborn through him." The child cooed, and the water's surface reflected countless eyes, human, animal, and something darker, unknown. Each reflection blinked in unison, as though the infant had absorbed more than just memory. It now carried fragments of souls. By dawn, the townspeople of Vermilion Parish were gone. No body, no trace, only the swamp, undisturbed yet humming with the resonance of lives now folded into the covenant. St. Anne's had ceased to be a convent or a building. It had become a vessel, a living altar for the infant whose hunger for existence itself knew no limit. The covenant had grown beyond its walls, a spreading shadow over the land. The feast of the forgotten had begun. The world itself was now a course to be consumed. By September, the bayou itself had become an extension of the infant's will. Thick, rolling fog blanketed the swamp, carrying shapes that were neither shadow nor substance. Villagers who dared approach at night swore they saw countless eyes staring from within the mist, black, unblinking, reflecting glimpses of the infant's gaze. Some claimed the eyes followed them home, appearing in mirrors, water troughs, and even the polished silver of cutlery, leaving them trembling and mute. The sisters had become conduits for the infant's perception. They moved through the fog with unnatural precision, their eyes glazed, their chants layered atop the wind's own voice. They could command the mists, drawing wanderers toward the convent where memory, identity, and life itself were absorbed into the infant's expanding consciousness. Father Giraud, if he remained, recorded only fragments. The fog is alive. It whispers names I do not recognize. Faces I have known smile at me, then vanish. The infant watches through them all. I cannot breathe. I cannot flee. Every blink draws me closer, and I feel myself folding into the mist. At night, the infant's cries, soft, cooing yet resonant, carried across the bayou. Animals fell silent. Frogs and fish froze in place. Trees shivered unnaturally, bending toward the glow of the convent. The air itself felt thick and sentient, responding to each small movement of the child. Even the stars above seemed altered. Giraud described them as dull, distant, and watching, as though the heavens themselves had withdrawn in fear. The infant had become not just a presence, but a nexus, a living eye observing, consuming, and reshaping reality in its image. By the fog's light, St. Anne's no longer seemed bound to this world. It had become a locus of something older than faith, older than men, an intelligence of shadows, memory, and light that neither nature nor God could contain. The eyes waited. And anyone who met them risked vanishing into the covenant, absorbed into the infant's all-seeing dominion. By October, the influence of St. Anne's had seeped far beyond the bayou. Fields along Vermilion Parish began to rot overnight, and crops twisted into grotesque forms that pulsed faintly with light. Travelers reported seeing shadows moving in perfect synchrony through the fog, figures that mimicked human shape yet carried no warmth or life. The covenant was no longer confined to the convent. It had become a living force, a contagion of memory, fear, and obedience. The sisters moved freely across the swamp now, no longer bound by walls. They guided lost townsfolk into the mist, their bodies swaying to rhythms dictated by the infant's will. Once caught, these souls never returned. Sometimes their voices would echo faintly through the fog, repeating phrases they could no longer remember the origin of, prayers, confessions, and screams blended together in a chorus of the damned. The infant had grown larger and more aware. Its gaze penetrated the fog, reaching into the minds of any who dared approach. The water reflected not only its light but visions of futures, of those who would vanish, of the swamp itself consuming the land. It was a being that folded space and thought into itself, a nexus of darkness and unearthly intelligence. Father Giraud's final surviving entry described his last attempt to resist. I tried to speak against it, to rally the living, but every word returned to me twisted, reshaped. The infant sees all, hears all, and folds us into its will. I am no longer myself, only a reflection, a shadow tethered to its covenant. By late October, even the priests sent to investigate the convent never returned. Their absence was noted only by the intensifying whispers along the fog, a sound that seemed to pulse with the infant's heartbeat. The swamp itself had become a living map of the covenant. Each ripple, each murmur, each fog-bound shadow a node in the network of darkness the infant commanded. St. Anne's was no longer a convent. It was the epicenter of a force older than the diocese, older than the bayou, a force that demanded obedience and devoured the living to sustain its unnatural power. The covenant had spread, and nothing would ever be the same. By November, the air around St. Anne's shimmered with unnatural heat and shadow. The swamp hummed with the pulse of the infant's will, each ripple of water and sway of moss a testament to its dominion. The remaining sisters had become almost unrecognizable, their skin pale and translucent, eyes reflecting the black glow of the infant, bodies moving in perfect, unnatural symmetry. Father Giraud's final fragmentary entries hint at his last vigil. I remain hidden yet cannot hide. The infant watches from every reflection, every shadow, every ripple. Its eyes follow me, and I feel myself folding, unraveling, becoming part of its rhythm. I hear the sisters. No, they are no longer sisters. They are instruments of the covenant, bending the bayou to its will. That night the infant was placed upon the altar in a circle of salt and ash, its gaze piercing into the very soil. The sisters chanted in harmonics that seemed older than any language, drawing the fog itself into spirals that glowed faintly like embers in the darkness. The infant's cooing grew louder, resonating in every chest and bone, until even the trees along the bayou quivered. It was no longer simply a child, but a nexus, a pulse of living power that bent both minds and matter. The waters rose slightly, rippling unnaturally, reflecting not the sky but visions of those who had vanished, faces twisted, mouths open in silent screams, eyes black and watching. Giraud wrote with trembling hands, "It is complete. The covenant is complete. The infant sees all, and through it all things obey. I do not know if I am still myself or merely a shadow folding into its light. I pray, yet I hear only the chant and the cooing and the hum of the bayou. There is no dawn here. There is only the vigil." As the vigil continued, the infant's pulse synchronized with the swamp itself. Every creature, every plant, every shadow seemed to obey. St. Anne's and the bayou were no longer separate. They had become a single living organism, a temple of darkness under the infant's gaze. And the world beyond, for those who dared approach, was only a mirror of that terror, reflected in every ripple, every shadow, and every whisper carried on the fog. By winter, St. Anne's and the bayou were indistinguishable. The convent no longer appeared on any map, its gates hidden beneath an unending fog. The infant had grown, not in size but in presence. Its gaze reached across the swamp, touching thought, memory, and fear. Every living creature within miles moved as if tethered to its will. Even the wind carried its whispers, cold and insistent, shaping the world to echo its covenant. Mother Adelaide, now more shadow than woman, cradled the infant on the altar. Her skin shimmered faintly, as though lit from within by a black flame. The sisters knelt around them, their bodies fluid, their voices one with the fog, their devotion absolute. The covenant had consumed their humanity entirely. Father Giraud's final words, scratched into a fragment of wood found months later, hinted at the last flicker of resistance. I have seen the end. There is no escape. The infant is not just in the convent. It is the convent. It is the swamp, the fog, the reflections. Every life is folded into its will. I am nothing. All is nothing. Only the covenant remains, the infant cooed, and the shadows surged. Trees bent, waters rippled unnaturally, and the fog thickened into a living wall. Any who approached St. Anne's were drawn inexorably toward the altar, consumed by the light of the infant's eyes. Their memories and essence absorbed into the covenant. They became part of the swamp, part of the sisters, part of the unending pulse of darkness and light intertwined. St. Anne's had ceased to be a place of faith or life. It was a nexus of eternal hunger, a living organism of shadow and devotion, overseen by the infant whose cooing shaped all it touched. The covenant was eternal, unchallenged and absolute. And somewhere in the mist, the infant's gaze extended beyond the swamp, beyond the bayou, perhaps beyond the world itself. The whispers in the fog carried its name, soft yet insistent. All are mine. All will belong. All will join the covenant. No light penetrated. No sound broke the chant. Only the pulse remained, steady, eternal, unrelenting. The covenant had triumphed. St. Anne's was no longer a place. It was a command, a will, a truth beyond salvation.